Okay, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. We are in Parashat Devarim. Let's not leave it on that. Let's leave it on that. We are in Parashat Devarim. So I'm going to do, so first of all, I'd like to welcome you all. And we are going to read through the Parsha as best we can. So it's basically Deuteronomy chapters 1 through 3. And let's see what we can make of it. 3:22, chapter 3, verse 22. Okay, so let me get rid of this scrolling banner, my current ticker. There we go. That's gone. Let me get rid of this YouTube thingamajiggy and share the screen differently. Oops. Share screen. Window. Torah. Share. There we go. Okay, and we are going to start in the beginning of Deuteronomy. So we're in the 5th book. We've been pretty consistently reading from the very beginning of Genesis. This is the last book, the last part of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 fifths of the Torah, as someone I know likes to say. And here we go. So we are in verse 1. אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה אל כל ישראל בעבר הירדן במדבר בערבה מול סוף בין פרן ובין תופל ולבן וחצרות ודי זהב. Okay, so where are we? We are Ba'ever Yarden, right? The Israelites are about to enter into the land of Israel. Well, not quite yet, but soon in the next book. And so where are all these places? Paran, Tofel, Lavan, Hatzerot, Wadi, Zahav. Should we try to take the time to look them up? Nah, I don't think so. We'll just waste too much time. Not waste, we'll spend too much time and we won't be able to forge ahead. But somewhere right across the Jordan River, right? Because the Israelites, they enter into a place called Galgal. I was in Galgal, or what they believe is ancient Galgal, with a, I'm sorry, not Galgal, Gilgal, with a good friend of mine, Bruce Brill, about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago already. Wow, hard to believe. And that is the first place that the Israelites enter the land in the book of Joshua, chapter 10-ish. Okay. Verse 2. Had Sa'ir Ad Halish Barnea. Okay, so it's a 10-day journey, Mechorev, through the ways of Har Sa'ir. So Sa'ir is the mountain that was given to Esav, right? A play on words, because Esav was hairy. The Torah often likes to use plays on word, or we can plays on words, or we can look at it a different way, that it was named because Esav was hairy, right? We also have Yaakov tricking his father Isaac by putting the goat's hair on his arm, right? So there's a connection between Esav and hair, and that is probably why Mount Seir was given its name, or alternatively, it's one of those plays on words, one of those coincidences, right? We have two explanations for why Beersheba was given its name, one relating to the word number 7, which is Sheva in Hebrew, another relating to Shavua, which is an oath, right? Two different explanations. Let's look up Mount Seir for a second. Here. So, assuming we know where it is, Al-Shafra Mountains shown in red in southwest Jordan. So they're saying somewhere in this area is Mount Seir. That makes sense, right? Because it's they were heading up towards Ever Yarden. Gilgal is going to be somewhere around. Let's see. This is Jerusalem. So that would make, well, Jericho's right around there. It's north of Jericho. Maybe around here is Gilgal, right? So that's around where they're going to enter the land of Israel. If you can see my cursor moving, I hope you can. I should blow this up. So around is where they're going to enter the land of Israel. So Mount Seir is somewhere around there. Let's read what Rabbi Wikipedia has to say, and maybe we can place ourselves a little bit more. You remind me of pedophiles. I have no idea what that means. Thank you. Okay, so let's see what Rabbi Wikipedia has to say. Mount Seir is the ancient and biblical name for mountainous region stretching between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. The Gulf of Aqaba is down here. That's where Elat is, the Dead Sea. We all know where the Dead Sea is. That's up here. So Dead Sea over here, Gulf of Aqaba down here, Lake Kinneret, or the Sea of Galilee up here, right? Maybe I should, well, it doesn't matter. Okay, in the northwestern region of Edom and the southeast kingdom of Judah, it may also have marked the older historical limit of ancient Egypt in Canaan. A place called Seir in the land of Shashu, thought to be near Petra, Jordan, is listed in the temple of Amenhotep III. That was an Egyptian pharaoh. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the modern Arabic equivalent is thought to be Jibal. Jibal means hill or mountain. Jibal Shara. So for instance, the word Gibraltar, which you've all heard of, which I've been to, is Jabal, stands for Jabal Tariq, based on, I believe, the person that conquered, well, not the person that conquered, but the Moor that first conquered Gibraltar. So Gibraltar, Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. From Gibraltar, you can look across and you can see Morocco, which I've been to, as anyone who knows me well, many times. Okay, so the Hebrew Bible mentions two distinct geographical areas named Seir, a land of Seir and Mount Seir on the south border by the Arava to the west, and that's now referring to our verse here, right? And another Mount Seir further south on the north border of Judah, mentioned in Ezekiel, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Mount Seir was named for Seir the Horite, whose offspring had previously inhabited the area. Okay, let's see that. Genesis 14:6. Genesis 14:6. Shabbat Shalom, Ariella and Ben. So let's take a little excursion over to Genesis 14:6. Let's see what we got. Oops, that's 13. So this is the War of the Kings. The 4 kings against the 5 kings, and here it says in 14:6. Wa'et hahori beharran sa'ir ad el paran asher al hamidbar. So it's explaining where these different kings were. And I don't know if it mentions this guy Seir anywhere else. Let's look at the concordance. So these are Horites in their Mount Seir. Genesis 32:3. So this is going to be where, if I'm not mistaken, okay, so here, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. We don't have anything before that. Hold on a second. We have a lot in Genesis 30. Let's look at Genesis 36 for a second. We'll just grab the English to make it go a little bit faster. So this is the line of Esau. So here we go. So in Genesis 36:8, we have, okay, let's start here. I'll just read in English again to make it go quickly. Esau, all his other animals, and all the goods he had acquired in Canaan, and moved to a land some distance from his brother Jacob. Right? So this is basically just an account of Esau, the genealogies of Esau. Okay. Their possessions were too great for them to remain together. The land where they were staying could not support them both because of their livestock. So Esau, that is Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. So Edom, that's also play on words, right? Because he was said to be ruddy or red when he was born, and then you have the red lentil soup or the red porridge, which is Adom, right? So all of his names are plays on words or related to his character, right? We know he was red, which is Adom. In Hebrew, red is in ancient Hebrew red, and in modern Hebrew, red is Adom, and he was called Edom. All right. and we know he was hairy, and he lived in the hill country of Sa'ir, which means hairy. So the only instance I guess we have before this is in Genesis 14:6, and all it seems to be saying is that the Horites lived in Har Sa'ir, right? That's all it says right here. So we know we know that the Torah will retroactively name stuff. Is retroactively the right word? Will anachronistically name stuff. We have the phrase mentioned, for instance, well, we have the different different places in the land of Israel mentioned according to where the tribes would live, like from Beersheba till Dan, or Dan to Beersheba, right? Even before the Israelites entered into the land, right? We have, for instance, what would be a good example? Well, we saw one not too long ago in Numbers 10. I'm going to go with. No, it's going to be before that. Numbers 8. No. No. I don't know. I can't remember it. Okay. Numbers 13. Thank you, Rabbi Google. So if we go to Numbers 13 again, I'll just stick in the English for now, just to make it go a little bit more quickly, right? So these are the spies that were sent up into the land of Israel. One second. Negative. Well, that's not the example I was looking for. This does give names. So 1 second. No, that's not the example I was looking for. Let's try this. So this is also only later. I don't know. I can't remember what example I was looking for. Anyway, so my point is that that even though it's called Har Seir in the Torah, or even though we see in Genesis 14 that the mountain is called Har Seir, and in 14:6, or in the hill country of Seir, right? It doesn't mean that it wasn't named for Esav, because names can acquire, or names can be listed retroactively. In other words, the later names, or the names at the time the Torah was written, codified, can be given, even though the place might not have been called that at the time. And I was trying to think of some specific examples, but for some reason they escape me right now. Okay, so going back to here, the point is that, okay, so we know that there's this mountain Har Seir. We know that this is where Esav, who was hairy, settled. And let's just look at that. I don't want to get too far off track, but I always do, so what the heck. Okay, so Esav is going to be mentioned in, let's see. Let's go for Genesis 25. Right. So here we go. In Genesis 25:25, and we'll look at the Hebrew on this one, but let me read the English first. Okay, so starting in 24, when the time came for her to give birth, talking about Rivka, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. Which nobody knows what it means. The footnote here says Esau may mean hairy. Okay, in what language? I'm not sure. However, let's explore this a little bit more. Let's look at the Hebrew, Genesis 25:25. Actually, let me get a different version. So if we go to Genesis 25:25, we see in the Hebrew, right here, Wayetze Harishon, the first one came out, Admoni. Okay, Admoni means, they usually translate as ruddy, reddish. Okay, ruddy, which means ruddy, red, right? So it means reddish. Okay, kulo, he was completely red, or his entire body was red. Ki aderet, and aderet is usually translated as a what's the official word? Here it says cloak, but they usually translate a mantle. I have no idea what a mantle is, but I guess it's a cloak. So it's a cloak. Aderet sa'ir, like a hairy cloak, basically. So it was like the guy came out like a red gorilla, basically, right? It's completely covered. I mean, we're talking about a baby. How many babies are completely covered in hair? I've never. I mean, I know there is a phenomenon, but this is this. So he came out red and like a hairy cloak, right? So he's covered with red hair, basically, whatever that means. Esau. Okay, and his name was called Esau. Okay. It doesn't explain. We don't know what the word Esau means. So then footnote down here in the English, I don't have it here, but it says that it means hairy. Okay. I don't know. Let's look at Robert Alter, see if he gives any explanation. I know we're going off track, but who cares? So that's Genesis 25:25. In Genesis 25:25, Esau was alive. 25. Let's see if Robert Alter brings any. Okay. So Robert Alter says regarding ruddy like a hairy mantle, so they call him Esau. This is an odd displacement of etymology in the naming sentence. Perhaps it is. It's true. Meaning, it usually says his name was Esau because he was ruddy like a hairy mantle or something like that. But it's not even clear, and I agree with Robert Alter on this one, that it's not even clear that this is that this name has to do with this explanation here. But let's see what Robert Alter has to say. Okay. Perhaps because the writer was not sure what Esau actually meant. Ruddy, Adom, refers to another name for Esau, as in verse 30. And the hairy component of the mantle, similarly, Sa'ar, refers to Edom's territory, Seir, right? So he links, of course, the hairy mantle, okay, a mantle of hair, literally, to Seir, okay. But nobody knows what Esau means. So there we go. So that's what Robert Alter says. Of course, we can go look for more explanations and speculation. But if he says that nobody knows what it means, it usually means nobody knows what it means, because he kind of takes a compilation of a lot of different commentaries. If we looked at Rashi, you'd probably have some stupid speculation. If we looked at Ibn Ezra, which is always interesting, you might have some very good speculation. But let's, for the heck of it, look at Ibn Ezra. So Genesis 25:25. Enough. And we got to go down to Ibn Ezra. An excellent, excellent commentator. Really good. Unlike Rashi, who's completely useless. 25:25. Okay. Interesting point, but I'm not going to get close here. Adherent. See here. Look, adherent. Okay. Oops. Where are we? In Ibn Ezra. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you take this one? Okay, it's easier for me. All right, just plug that one in and face it with me. All right, so again, this is not exactly. Let's just stick to they called his name. Those who saw him called him thus. You put it on the lowest. No, I feel like I'm in a hurricane right now. The lowest. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. And they called his name. This is the Ibn Ezra. Those who saw him called him thus. The name Esau probably connotes a unique occurrence. Ma'aseh. Oh, so he gives an interesting etymology. He relates Esau to Ma'aseh. Okay. The birth was extremely wondrous. Every human being leaves the womb and placenta which covers him. However, in this instance, the two placentas opened simultaneously. I don't know where he's getting that from. There's a footnote here. This is obvious since Jacob was born grasping Jacob's heel. Thus, Jacob and Esau were each in a separate placenta, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he relates it to the word ma'aseh, Esau. So in Esau, you have so ma'aseh, the underlying root would be ayin sin he, asa. And here, and he is often, although in that case, it's part of the three-letter root, but he can often drop in and drop out. So the he is replaced with a vav, can easily be placed with a vav in many constructs. We see that in many instances, okay? But here, so he's saying that Esau is related to asa or ma'aseh, which is means an occurrence, okay? So because it was a unique occurrence that he was born grasping the heel, or that Yaakov was born grasping the heel of Esau, that he was named Esau. Okay, interesting idea. I gotta say, Ibn Ezra is good. It's a very, very interesting something to think about because it is very well grammatically based on, sounds like the birth of Eddie Munster, if you ask me. I don't remember the birth of Eddie Munster. Come on, old timer. Yarden, I mean, what are you still sitting around watching the Munsters with, what is it? Wednesday, or is that the Addams? I always get the two mixed up. They should have just merged the Munsters and the Addams family into like one like super family, like the Brady Bunch, and then we wouldn't be confused who was on what show. I know Cousin It. Okay, Cousin It was the Addams family. Uncle Fester was the Addams family. Morticia, I think, was the Munsters. I don't know. I give up. At any rate, whatever. So, yeah, that would have been interesting, like the Brady Bunch version of the Munsters, and I guess you'd have to kill off two of the parents. No, that's not too nice. All right, Yikrashimo Esav. So the Ibn Ezra very interestingly relates that to Maaseh. Like, wow, look at this wonder that Yaakov is grasping the heel of Esau. But and the other comment we got from Robert Alter is. And again, regarding the Ibn Ezra, he always has a good reason for saying what he's saying. I've noticed that, So here, because the hey in asa can easily be drop out and be replaced with a vav. Hey, vav, nun, sometimes, but rarely aleph. No, aleph too. Yud. These are all letters that can kind of drop in and drop out and interchange. Okay, so he's saying, so it's grammatically sound for him to say that the vav is replacing the hey in the underlying root, which would be ayin sin hey asa. So very good comment. Definitely something to think about. But according to Robert Alter, nobody knows what it means from the context here, right? So he came out red, and he was like a hairy cloak. So Yikru Shemo Esau. But usually it would say something with Lachen Yikra'u Shemo Esau, and therefore they call his name Esau. But it doesn't say that here, so it's not really explicitly relating his name to his description. But he does have two descriptions that repeat themselves: that he's red and that he's hairy. Okay, kind of like Boris Johnson or something like that. So, and then down here we already have, now he's grown up miraculously, and just a couple of verses later, and so we have in verse 30, Oyomer Esav el Yaakov just highlight this. Ha le'iteni na min ha'adom ha'adom hazeh ki a'ef anochi al ken ikra shemo Edom. So now we have another explanation. So this is very common in the Torah, in the Tanakh, where you're going to get multiple explanations for the name of a person. So here it says they called his name Edom because of this red nazid, this red porridge. I don't know where they get the idea of lentils, but it's usually considered like a lentil stew, I guess, because there are such a thing as red lentils. Okay. So, but we already know that he was already described as red when he was born, right? Right here, Admoni, Edom, Admoni, Edom. So that's two explanations for why his name is Edom. He was born all red, covered with red hair, I guess, or red and covered with hair, and he sold his birthright for a bowl of red porridge. Okay, and then he's also called Harry, and the place he goes to is Seir, right? So we don't have any other explanation, any previous explanation as to why the place is called Seir, not that I can see. And so therefore, when it mentions Seir in Genesis 6, as we saw, this is long before Esau was born. Genesis 6:14. This is still in the time of Abraham, right? So not even Isaac is born yet, actually. I'm sorry, 6:14? No, 14:6. 6 is Noah. So in 14:6, so then we have the Horites, speaking about the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. So it just mentions these Horites who lived in Haram Seir, in their mountain Seir, in the mountainous region of Seir, or in their mountains of Seir, their mountain of Seir. Okay, so Seir is mentioned here long before Esau is ever born, but it's referred to as Seir, again showing that the Torah often will give the place name at the time the Torah was written, and not necessarily the place name that it was called at the time of the event being described in the Torah. Okay, let's unwind and go back to Deuteronomy. Any questions, any comments so far? Yet? Okay, let's move on then. So, in verse 2, so we better move on. Okay, trying to figure out where Mount Seir is, but وَيْهِي بِأَرْبَعِينَ شَنَةٍ ו12 חודש באחד לחודש. דיבר משה אל בני ישראל ככל אשר ציווה יהוה אותו עליהם. So it was in the 40th year. So remember, we're already up into the 40th year, right? So we saw, if we go here, to, where is it? Journeys. I can't remember. I wrote it down somewhere, but basically, in the book of Numbers, we go from in the 40th year, right? It skips very quickly. Okay, so the entire 40-year interval is really not mentioned. Okay, it is mentioned a little bit retroactively afterwards, but we are now suddenly in the 40th year. The Israelites are in Ever HaYarden, they're across from the Jordan River, getting ready to cross into the land, which they'll do in the book of Joshua. And Moshe is still alive. He will not enter the land, so he won't be alive for long. But he's still alive, and he's going to give his final set of speeches, and that's what basically Deuteronomy is. Okay, so the word Deuteronomy, right? it basically means the repetition or the mishneh, the repeating, right? So Deuteronomy, like duo, right? It means like the second reading or the second repetition. I guess it's Greek. Let's look up. Deuteronomy etymology. So the name Deuteronomy comes from Septuagint's Greek title for the book, Deuteronomion, meaning second law or repeated law, a name tied to one of the Hebrew appellations of the book, Mishneh Torah. Okay, so Mishneh Torah means the repeating. Mishneh from the word sheni or shnayim, right? Torah, a Mishneh is basically a repeating, right? The Mishneh Torah is also the name of the Rambam's book of halacha and some philosophy, which was written many centuries later. It's also the name of the Mishnah, right? Comes from that same root, the Mishnah, because it's a repeating or a second stating of the law. Okay, and I'm not sure when it was originally called Mishneh Torah, probably by the rabbis, I would imagine. Okay, at any rate, well, no, because the Septuagint, it was already written into the name of the book of the Septuagint. The Septuagint was 3rd century BCE, so I guess the Jews at that time were calling it Mishneh Torah already. I don't know. We'd have to look it up. We're not going to do that now. So, all right. So that's what Deuteronomy is. Okay, repetition or reiteration of the law, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So here we are in the on the first day of the 11th month. Okay, what is the 11th month in modern parlance? Oops, I'll just bring up the English here in case I need it, or in case I need to refer to it, I should say. So the 11th month. Okay, so let's see. Kislev is the 9th month, right? I believe Kislev is the 9th month, and then Hashvan comes after that. All right, Hebrew months. I guess it's Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, because then you have Adar, and then you have Nisan. So I guess it's Shvat, right? Hebrew months. We're talking about, here we go. Hashvan, so Kislev, so this is 7th, 8th, 9th is Kislev, Tevet. Oh, I knew I forgot one. Darn. Okay, right, not Hashvan. Hashvan is before Kislev, and then we have Tevet, and then we have Shvat. Adar is the 12th month, and if there's a second, if the calendar is intercalated, fancy way of saying there's a leap month added to it, then there's an Adar Aleph and an Adar Bet. But at any rate, according to the Babylonian names, which we as Karaites do not like to use, so we're talking about the month of Shvat, so the first day of a Shvat, not Tu B'Shvat, not the 15th of Shvat, but the first day of Shvat. Okay, so there we go. So we're talking about the winter time, right? Basically, and we know that the Israelites are going to enter into the land in Pesach. Now, this is the 40th year, right? So they're going to enter this year. If I'm not mistaken, it's not the 41st year they're going to enter. I'm pretty sure it's going to be this year. So a lot is going to happen in the next couple of months. I mean, let's place this in temporal context, right? So we are in the 11th month. Oops. Where are we? We're in the 11th month. We're in the first day of the month. Okay. Moshe and the Israelites are going to enter in the first month of the 15th day or the 14th day of the first month of the 15th day of the first month. They're going to enter in Passover on the 40th year. I believe it's the 40th year and not the 41st year. Okay, so that means that if we're in the 11th month, 12th month, 2 months until the Israelites enter into the land of Israel, 2 months for Moshe to give all of his Deuteronomical, his speeches of Deuteronomy, and then die. So a lot is going to happen to the Israelites in the next 2 months. Okay, again, assuming they're entering in the 40th year, which I believe is correct. I'd have to check it in the book of Joshua, but I believe that is correct. Okay, so we're talking about 2 months before where Moshe gives all his speeches, dies, and then the Israelites enter into the land of Israel, circumcise, conquer the land, conquer Jericho, or end up in Gilgal, conquer Jericho, all this kind of stuff. Well, that's afterwards conquering of Jericho, right? But so a lot is happening, right? Let's put this in context here. All right. Okay. So and I should add one more thing here. I do have my journeys thingy. So let's add this. So I'll skip. Any skip. Note that for myself. But let's list this. Okay, so we have here. So where are they now? So they are in the Arava. Okay. How can we list this here? It doesn't say time of arrival and time of departure. You know what? I better not, because I'd have to go back and see exactly when they arrived. They just says they're there. Okay, I'll just leave it alone for now, and it'll just take too much time anyway. All right, so so here we go. Now we have a big question, right? So this is a critical question we should pay attention to during Deuteronomy. Moshe is going to give a lot of laws. He's going to reiterate laws. He's going to expand upon laws, and he's going to give some new laws. Okay, so some will be almost word for word repetitions of laws we've heard before. Some will be expansions of laws. Some will be completely new laws that we've never heard before. Okay, and then there's this issue of what is the Torah, or when it says that Moshe is giving the laws or the Torah, we have this big question throughout the Torah: what is meant by the word Torah? Okay, is the word Torah does it ever mean all 5 books of Moses? I'm really not sure, to be honest. Although it does say, well, no, it does not say that. I was thinking of something else. But let's pay attention to the word Torah. We should pay attention to it throughout the entire Torah, but we should especially pay attention to it in the book of Deuteronomy, okay? Or when it mentions the laws that were given. Does it mean all of the laws, a portion of the laws? We have to pay attention to that, okay? But the word Torah usually does not mean the entire 5 books of Moses. It usually means a set of instructions. In fact, it basically always means a set of instructions, okay? So let's pay attention to that. Alrighty, so where were we? Okay, so now he's gonna he's gonna tell all the children of Israel everything that God tells him, right? Or everything that God commanded him. Okay. מלך האמורי אשר יושב בחשבון, ועד עוג מלך הבשן אשר יושב באשדרות באדראי. So this is just saying that all of this happened after they wiped out Og and Sihon, took over their land. Ma'ever hayarden be'eretz Moav, across the Jordan River in the land of Moab. So we're talking about the eastern bank of the Jordan River. Ho'il Moshe be'er et haTorah hazot lemor. So this is a very interesting sentence. First of all, let's get a translation for this word ho'il. In modern Hebrew, ho'il or leho'il means to benefit or to do good for. It benefits, zemo'il, you would say. So let's see how it's used in the Tanakh. Show willingness, be pleased, determined, undertake to do anything. Shew, willingness, be pleased, determine, undertake. So again, as usual, the Strong's is basically just copying, getting it from the BDB. But let's see how it may be used. Exodus 2:21 maybe is a good example. So this is when Moshe runs away to Midian. Moshe lashevet et ha'ish, talking about Jethro. So it seemed good in Moshe's eyes. Here it's translated, at least the KJV is translated as he was content to dwell with the man, speaking about Jethro, his future father-in-law. And now not his future father-in-law, but by the second half of this verse, already his father-in-law. Okay, and he gave him, meaning Jethro gave Moshe Tzipora his daughter. Okay, so content is how the KJV translates it. Let's see what other translations we can get here. Okay, I've got to go to interlinear, parallel. Yeah. Moshe agreed to stay with the man. Moshe accepted the invitation, was content to dwell, agreed, content, willing, agreed. So, okay. Agreed seems to be the majority, but I actually like the translation of content. So Moshe was content, or it was good in Moshe's eyes, okay? So going back to here, and again in modern Hebrew, leho'il means to benefit, okay? You could say something to another Israel like zelo mo'il, it's not going to do you any good to do that, right? Zelo mo'il lechol nimalim me'archov. It's not going to do you any good to eat ants off the street. I don't know where I came up with that one. Okay, but at any rate, so if we go with this translation, it's Mo'av. So Moshe decided, or Moshe saw it, felt it was a good idea to be'er is to clarify, to clearly explain et haTorah hazot, to clearly explain. And here we have this word Torah, and it says this instruction and saying. So, oh boy, there's a lot to pick apart here. Let's first talk about the word be'er. Let's get a couple of translations on this one. Let's go to Robert Alter on this one. So this is Deuteronomy 1. So, got to go back here. Let's see how he deals with those two words. He's not the be-all and end-all, but he's good. I like him. He's a good starting point for me. I often agree with him, not always. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 1. So, Moses undertook to expound this teaching, saying. That's how he deals with it. So, Ho'il, he translates as undertake. And Be'er, to clarify, he translates as expound. Very good translation, as always, almost always, okay? And then we have this teaching. In Hebrew, that's et haTorah hazot, right? So that implies that it's going to be a certain teaching. Moshe's basically, this is Moshe's, Sermon on the Mount kind of thing. He's going to give a number of sermons. That's the way, when it speaks about haTorah hazot, this Torah, it doesn't mean the entire Torah. It means he's going to give a sermon now, right? He's going to explain some things. And that's what's referred to as Torah. This speech, which is going to include a bunch of laws, is the Torah. Okay, so the word Torah here, from the context, from Robert Alter's translation, right? This teaching, okay? Saying, right? And what is the teaching? So Moses spoke to the Israelites according to all the Lord had charged concerning them, right? So basically, God had given him maybe some more laws, or clarified some laws, or Moshe's just taking everything he knows from God, all of God's laws, and now he's going to turn it into a sermon. So this is Moshe's Sermon on the Mount, the real Sermon on the Mount, not well, not the one that the J guy later gives, right? So right. So so expound is how Robert Alter translates be'er. Let's just get rid of this for a second. And let's just open up be'er for a second. Okay, so this is, I believe, NIV also translates it as expound. Razot be'er hetev. Okay, very distinctly in Deuteronomy 27. So again, to expound. Tov hazon be'er al haluchot, and make it clear. They translate here as inscribe. So be'er really has to do with making clear, right? Here we go. In Strong's, it says to make distinct or plain, which I'm sure he's getting from the BDB. Make distinct, plain. And then we have a whole bunch of examples, right? Declare, make plainly. So this is reminds me of a verse which we Karaites like to go to a lot, or actually, you know, we could put it that way. So this is going to be Ezra. Is it 9? No, it's not. One second here. I'm sorry, maybe it's Nehemiah. No, it's not Ezra. It's Nehemiah 8. There we go. So the Israelites basically they haven't been keeping the Torah, so they decide they want to kind of, you know, recommit themselves to the Torah. So I'll just read it in English to make it go fast. We'll consult Hebrew when we need to. So they told Ezra, the teacher of the law, to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. So now, very interesting. Actually, we will go to the Hebrew for this one. And this is Nehemiah 8:1. So here, the book of the law of Moses is called in Hebrew Sefer Torah Moshe, the book of the instructions of Moses, or the instruction of Moses, right? So here it seems to be referring to, I mean, this is a much later period. We're already talking about basically the beginning of the Second Temple period, or the inter-temple period. I don't think they've rebuilt the temple yet. No, they've not rebuilt the temple yet, and but they will soon. And but we'll call it the Second Temple period. And here, the Sefer Torah Moshe, clearly from the context, is referring to all, I would think, all 5 books, right? So it's being called Sefer Torah Moshe, but this is much later, right? So you can't use this to understand what the word Torah means in the book of Deuteronomy. Here, the book is already, this is centuries, this is now at least 1,000 years. No, maybe not quite 1,000 years, 500, about 800 years or so after Moshe died, after the Israelites entered the land of Israel, right? So now the book has already been codified, right? The book is already a book, a set of 5 books, or a set of 5/5. And so now when it says the word Torah, Sefer Torah Moshe, the book of the instructions of Moshe, here it seems clear to be referring to what we would call the Chumash, right? The what we might call the Torah or the Chumash, okay? But here in Deuteronomy, that's not the case. At any rate, that's not the verse but that's an interesting point to note. Again, what we want to do is as we're going through the book of Deuteronomy, is pay very careful attention to this word Torah, okay? Because it's misunderstood as meaning the entire Torah. Some people will say it means just the book of Deuteronomy, but I don't think it means any of that anywhere in the book of Deuteronomy, although we'll have to see as we go along. It really means a set of instructions, right? So in this case, it's the set of instructions that Moshe is going to give forth in his sermon, in his upcoming sermon. Okay, so what I really wanted to look at was this. Um, one second. Right. So in Nehemiah 8:8, it says this, and we'll go to the Hebrew in a second, right? They read from the book of the law of God. And remember, before it was called the book of the law of Moshe, now it's called the book of the law of God. So that's interesting too. But we'll go to the Hebrew in a second, making it clear and giving the meaning so that the people understood what was being read. I'm going to tell you why this is so important to Karaism in a second. Let's open up the Hebrew on that one. Let's open up the entire chapter. One second. Okay. So where was that? 8. Okay. So here's our verse. In fact, I'll just blow this up a little bit to make it really clear what we're trying to say here. Blows the other ones up too. Okay. ويقرؤوا بسفر بتوراة Elohim. Okay. So they read in the book, in the instructions of God. Okay. Or you can actually translate this in the book of the instructions of God, even though it's not in the construct form, but the implication there. So here they're calling the book of the instructions of God, or the book which is the instructions of God, Torah Elohim. Remember, up above it was called, in verse 1, it was called Sefer Torah Moshe. It was called the book of the instructions of Moshe. Here in verse 8, it's called the book of the instructions of God. Not exactly the same grammatical format, but it doesn't matter. The book of the instructions of God. Okay? So this is not even the point I want to make here, but this is a very important point. This implies that the Israelites saw the book that Moses wrote as the book of the instructions of God, right? Doesn't this imply, or this might very well imply, that even back then they believed the entire book to be a divine document? Okay? Right? The book of the instructions of God is the same thing as the book of the instructions of Moshe, right? It's almost like God and Moshe are writing it together, or God is dictating to Moshe, or God is giving the instructions and Moshe is writing out the book, and then maybe God is editing it. I'm doing my master's degree in marine biology. For those who know me, probably already know, and I have to read tons and tons and tons of scientific articles, and I just forgot what I was going to say. What was my point? I can't even remember. I was going to make an interesting point. Now I can't remember what I was going to say. Sefer Torah Moshe, Sefer Torah Elohim. I can't remember the point I was going to make. Oh well, that's the way it goes. Any rate, but the point I really wanted to make here in this verse is, okay, so Yikra'u b'Sefer b'Torah Elohim mifurash v'som sechel v'yavinu b'mikra. Okay, so mifurash is similar to. So mifurash means well explained or explained. Okay, let's look at the English translation here. Distinctly. Okay, very interesting that we see. Okay, it's similar to this, right? So here, to make distinct or plain, again, this is just Strong's Concordance, but I'm using it to make a point, all right? Or BDB. Okay, make distinct plain. So that was in Deuteronomy. Let me put this back down to normal size. Okay, so that one, I'll make it a little bit larger. Like chicken soup. It may not help, but it couldn't wait. There we go. That size. Okay, so all right, just bear with me here. So Ariella says, was this Torah a special teaching for that time, seeing they would start a new experience going into the land? Is definitely preparing them to go into the land, right? It definitely was preparing them to go into the land. That's for sure. The way I like to think of the book of Deuteronomy is kind of clarification of previous laws, right? And okay, we'll get to the implications of that in a second. But in order to do that, let's go back here to Nehemiah. Where were we? Right? Here we go. So, so they read. So here Ezra is reading the Sefer Torah Elohim in the book of the instructions of God, same as the book of the instructions of Moses, Miforash, okay, clearly, or in a clear way, in a clear manner, or maybe in an explained manner, okay, V'som Sechel, and putting meaning, shall we say, or making it known, or making it understood, you could say. Sechel is kind of like, in modern Hebrew, sechel is common sense or sense. So giving it sense or giving it meaning. V'yavinu b'mikra. V'yavinu, in this case, is what's called a causative verb, havin, okay? Even though often it's used as, not as in the causative sense. Here, it seems to be clear from the context, it's being used in the causative sense, and making them understand. V'yavinu, they made the implied, there's no direct object here, but the implied direct object is them, meaning the people listening from context. So they made them understand the mikra. And here we have the word mikra, okay? So mikra literally means the reading, okay, that which is read, okay? But in this case, it's referring again to the Torah Elohim. So here we have it called Torah Elohim, the instructions of God. And this is clearly referring to the entire 5 books of Moses. At least I would think so from the context. Here up above in verse 1, in Nehemiah 8:1, we have it referred to as Sefer Torah Moshe. So here it's the book of the instructions of Moses. Okay, here it's Sefer Torah Elohim. Sefer Torah Elohim. This year it's the book of the instructions of God. And here it's called the Mikra. Although Mikra in this case may not be referring to the entire Torah, it might just be referred to what they were reading at the time. Because likro means to read, mikra means that which is being read. But we could make a case that the mikra is another word already at this point in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah for the Torah. Of course, the mikra, the Karaites are called, the word Karaite comes from the word mikra, right? That which is read, okay? The Karaites are also called B'nai Mikra. In fact, on the logo of the World Alliance of Qara'im, you can see that right here, B'nai Mikra HaKaraim, okay? So, so the Mikra is later on for sure what was referred to as the scripture, ironically, because Mikra means to read and scripture means to write, right? From escribere, I guess the Latin would be. In modern Spanish, it's escribir. Escribir, I think. In Portuguese, it's the same thing, escribir, right? And so that which is written, the past participle is escrito, okay? So scriptures, or I guess in Latin it would be something like escribitus or something like that, or escriptus. In Spanish and Portuguese, escrito would be written, right? So the scripture is that which is written, but here, scriptures, obviously, it comes from the Romance language, it comes from Latin, right? But here, where were we? Oh, we're in Nehemiah. Here it's called the Mikra, that which is read, right? Because it wasn't really written down. There weren't a lot of copies until the invention of the printing press. There were just not a lot of copies of the Torah floating around. You couldn't have, there was no internet back then, and there was certainly no, you couldn't go into your local Beit Knesset and sit down, grab a Tanakh off the shelf. Not that you can today, because you will have a lot of trouble finding it. As I always like to say, the hardest book to find in a rabbinical Beit Knesset is the Tanakh. You may find the Mishnah, you may find the Gemara, you may find a million irrelevant commentaries from thousands of years, spanning thousands of years. But try to find Tanakh in a rabbinical Beit Knesset, and you're going to have trouble. At any rate, I digress. So my point is, okay. So, but here it's called the Mikra, which could just mean that which was being read by Ezra and being interpreted or being explained by the other people there, or it could be another word for, as it was later, for the entire Torah, for the Torah Elohim or the Torah Moshe. At any rate, my point is that this has been a polemic. This verse here has been a polemic against the Karaites, Okay, because if you, I'll translate the verse, word for word, more or less word for word. "Yikra'u b'sefer b'torata Elohim." So they read. So it's Ezra and a bunch of people. Okay, so they read, meaning Ezra and this bunch of people. What they were doing is Ezra was reading. Okay, so they read, but it really means Ezra read from the book of Elohim Miforash. Okay, v'som sechel v'yavinu b'mikra. Okay, so clearly explained, giving sense to the words and making them and explaining them or making them understood, right? So it seems that these other people, which I won't read the names now, who were with Ezra, were basically explaining the Torah to the people, okay? And this has been a polemic against the Karaites that I heard already many years ago when I first started becoming a Karaite. That I went to a rabbi of mine at the time. It doesn't matter who, and he said to me, "Look at this verse, right? It's clear that there's an oral law because they're reading the Torah. Ezra's reading the written Torah, the scripture, the Mikra, the read word, not the written word, and then you have these other people standing around, and it lists them a couple of verses above, okay, and they're explaining the Torah. So what does that mean? Obviously, there's a written law and there's an oral law, right? If only the written law counted, then no one would need to explain the Torah. Well, that's, I remember when I first got into Karaism, I would go back and forth with rabbis and Karaites, kind of hearing what their opinion was about various issues, and I was like, wow, that's really disappointing. I really love this idea of Karaism, and now this rabbi is showing me, without a doubt, here proof that there's an oral law. Well, of course, that as I became more and more versed in the Tanakh, I realized that that's not what's going on here at all. First of all, we're talking about, you have to understand context. Okay, the Israelites these are Israelites who were either left in the land, right? Poor people, the Ama'aretz, the people who didn't. It's a rabbinical meaning of the word Ama'aretz, but the people who really didn't know much. Okay, or the people coming back from Babylon who had been in Babylon for 70 years and they were already speaking Aramaic. In fact, Aramaic was already being spoken in the land of Israel, right? That's why some of the later books of the Torah, such as Daniel, are partially in Aramaic. Okay, and so the Israelites, the Jews and they're called Jews at this point because it's the land of Judea, right? They didn't understand the Torah. They needed it explained to them because they're disconnected, from their original culture already, right? It's already past the exile, past the destruction of the first temple. They've been in Babylon for 70 years. The people who were left behind really had, very little leadership, and they were just the simple people of the land. And so that's why they need all of this explained to them. Maybe they don't even know Hebrew. They're probably speaking Aramaic at this time. Okay, but even if that's not the case, even if they're fluent in Hebrew, okay, still we know that yes, the written Torah does need to be explained, but that's different. That's different, right? What are we doing here? We're sitting here reading the written Torah and trying to understand it. Okay, that's not the same as an oral law in the sense that the rabbis mean an oral law. Okay, what the rabbis basically mean by an oral law is using the words of the Torah in non-logical ways and non-traditional ways. Okay, midrash. Okay, they're basically expounding or explicating. I don't know if explicating is the right word. They're expounding upon the words of the Torah in such a way as they can create new laws which are not implied by the simple text of the Torah. Even though they call it the pshat, the simple meaning of the Torah, it's not the simple meaning of the Torah. And there are some excellent articles written on this, which I read many, many years ago. And if anyone's interested, you can see this in detail. But the rabbis, or alternatively, what they're doing is they're coming up with laws, probably even more likely, or some of both. They're coming up with laws which for whatever reason they want to implement. Okay, maybe they're influenced by the surrounding Greeks. Maybe back in Persia, they're influenced by the surrounding Zoroastrians, by the surrounding Babylonians back in Babylon. At any rate, they want to implement certain laws for whatever reason. Okay, because they're influenced by foreign peoples, or by foreign ideas, or by foreign influences in general, and then they need to justify it, right? So they go back into the Torah and they look for verses that they can interpret or that they can use to justify their new laws. So what would be the classic example? Deuteronomy 6:4, tefillin, right? We'll get to that soon enough. But Deuteronomy 6:4, is it 4:6? No, 6:4, right? Deuteronomy 6:4, where the classic example where it says Ot al yadecha v'totafot beinecha, right? A sign on your hand, or like a sign on your hand, and like frontlets or a remembrance between your eyes, or jewelry between your eyes. So the rabbis use that verse to come up with their amulets that they strap to their bodies, right? But they need to. So they're interpreting the words of the Torah in a non-simplistic way. That's their oral law. Or perhaps they just like wearing amulets, and because the other people around were wearing amulets. I remember learning many years ago. There's a verse in the Babylonian Talmud. I would have to look it up to know exactly where it is, but I learned this with a rabbi that he used to say that you can wear a very small tefillin because there's a sugya, there's a discussion in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud, where someone, I think I have to remember correctly, goes out to the field and they get amulets that someone's wearing confused with tefillin. And amulets were very small, so that means tefillin can be very small. You don't need big tefillin. So this guy walks around with a small tefillin all day long, as a matter of fact. Looks like a complete idiot, but that's not my problem. He thinks he's a wise man, and but objectively, he looks like a complete moron. At any rate, that's neither here nor there. The point being that that's the rabbinical oral law, okay? Non-pshat, non-logical explications of the words of the Torah, okay? But that's not what's going on here at all, okay? So when Ezra is reading the Torah, and then his buddies are standing around, his colleagues are standing around him and explaining the words of the Torah, that's very different. They're explaining it in a simplistic, in a pshat way. They're explaining what the words of the Torah are saying, because the people listening to it don't understand, right? They didn't even know that it was that they were supposed to keep a holiday on the first day of the seventh month. This is all taking place on the first day of the seventh month, right? So if you read through, you'll see that's when it's taking place. Okay, let's unwind a little bit. So my point being is that here we have a verse, okay? Vayikra b'sefer b'Torah Elohim mifurash v'som secher v'yavinu b'mikra, okay? In a way that was understood, and they gave the sense of the words, and they made the people understand the reading, okay? This is very similar to this verse that we see here back in Deuteronomy, right here. Okay. Moshe et the Torah. Moshe is explaining, he's explicating or making clear the Torah, right? So here, be'er we saw is translated as by the BDB as make distinct or plain. Okay. If we go to Nehemiah 8:8, and I'll close that Nehemiah in a second. Then we have here miforash v'som sechel v'yavinu b'mikra, basically making clear. Miforash means to make clear or to explicate. Okay, here I'm looking at the translation. It says distinctly. Right, it's exactly the same thing as be'er. Okay, so either Moshe is giving an oral law, right, because he's explaining the Torah just the same way that Ezra did 800 years later, right? So he's explaining the Torah in the same way that Ezra does. So either Moshe is now giving an oral law, okay, or Nehemiah is not giving an oral law, right? It's the same thing going on, okay? But here's the problem: is if Moshe is giving an oral law, well, it's being written down in the Torah, so it's not an oral law; it's a written law, right? So Moshe is not giving an oral law because this is all what he's about to say is all being written down. It's part of the Torah, right? So he's obviously not explicating an oral law, and yet it says that Moshe is explaining or explicating or making clear or making distinct the instructions that he got from God, right? You see the illogical reasoning, or shall we say the circular reasoning? And I'll just review, okay, the polemic that's going on here. So the rabbis want to say, could be referring to the Targum. You'll have to explain that one, Emily. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. Anywho, let me explain the polemic, okay? So I was becoming a Karaite. I was really happy to realize that the oral law of the rabbis was, mostly, partially BS. I won't say completely, but mostly, partially BS. Let's put it that way. Just basically to get this horrible misunderstanding of the Torah out of my life. I go to a rabbi. I go to a rabbi. He mentions Nehemiah 8:8. He says, "No, look, here's proof of the oral law. Nehemiah 8:8 is proof of the oral law." Nehemiah's colleagues Nehemiah's reading the written law. Nehemiah's colleagues are giving the oral law. It says so right here in Nehemiah 8:8. That stinks. Now maybe Karaism is wrong. Maybe I have to be stuck in this Rabbinical Judaism. But wait a second. Then there's Deuteronomy 1:5. Moshe is doing the same thing. Moshe is explaining the laws to the people. So if Nehemiah's if Nehemiah's colleagues are giving the oral law, then Moshe's giving the oral law. But wait a second. Moshe's not giving an oral law because what he's about to say is being written down into the book of Deuteronomy, right? It's the written law. It's not the oral law. So if Moshe is not giving the oral law here, right? Clearly, right? Then this maybe means that Nehemiah is not giving the oral law either, right? Maybe he's doing the same thing. Maybe he's just explaining it, right? In the same way that Moshe is explaining it. And Moshe can't be giving the oral law because it's written. So by definition, it's not the oral law, it's the written law. So then you go back to Nehemiah 8 and you read it again. You say, oh, really? He's not giving an oral law. What he's doing is just explaining the written laws of the Torah to people in a way that they can understand, okay? That's very different, as we said, from a rabbinical concept of an oral law, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So if anyone ever brings you, yes, I know what the Targum is, Emily, but I'm not sure what your context is here. Referring to the Targum, the Aramaic translation. So I guess what you're saying is that, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that when Ezra's colleagues were making it known that they were reading the Targum into Aramaic because the people spoke Aramaic, but the Targum was not written until much later than that. So the Targum, let's just look it up. Right. So I think when they just say the Targum, right? So these two Targums, I'm not sure if it refers to Targum Onkelos or Targum Yonatan. These are the two. Well, it couldn't, right? Targum Yonatan and Nevi'im prophets. So it's got to be Targum Onkelos. Let's go to that. So here, according to Rabbi Wikipedia, authorship of, hold on, let me let the cat outside. She's gonna drive me crazy. 1 second, excuse me, please. What's up, too? Come here, baby. You wanna go out? Oh. I'm just hungry. Okay. So if we're talking about Targum Onkelos, then here, Targum Onkelos was written in, well, he was a famous convert to Judaism, Tanaic times of Tanaim. So that's 35 to 120 CE. So we are talking now about, so let's see, First Temple was destroyed in 585 BCE, 70 years later. Second Temple was rebuilt around 500 BCE. So we're talking about 500 to 600 years later, right? Then Ezra. So there was no Targum at that time, Emily, unless you're talking about something else, okay? Targum to Job dates to Qumran. Okay, so let's say it dates to Qumran. Qumran is the time of the late Second Temple period, right? So the Qumran scrolls are associated with the revolt, with the sects, which may have been the Essenes. A Professor Robert Eisenberg, I can't remember, says that they might have been disaffected Stukim, disaffected Sadducees who went out and went away from Jerusalem, and that they were not Essenes. At any rate, Robert Eisenman. Oh, watch his stuff. That's his last name. Robert Eisenman, really brilliant guy. At any rate, expert on this period. At any rate, so the Qumran scrolls are all from the from the period of the revolt, the Roman revolt, right? So we're talking at around 66, I believe it started. 70 it ended. 66 CE, 70 it ended. So again, we're talking about at least 500, maybe 600 years later than the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So there was no Targum. There was no Qumran scrolls at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay? Alrighty. And Ariella says the rabbis of that time and forward desired the power that belonged to God alone. Absolutely. Absolutely. They replaced the authority of the Torah with their own authority. Oh, they most certainly did. And they made it darn clear that they're doing it, right? They started the new year not when the Torah says to do it, in the first month in Nisan. We'll use the Babylonian names because that's what people know. But they made it 180 degrees. Where's the camera? 180, 100, 180. Well, I can't get my hand on the camera. 180 degrees in opposition. So it's actually right across. If you think of the calendar as a circle, it's right across the calendar. So they made it the exact opposite. They made it the first day of the seventh month. Okay. Patrilineal descent. The Torah is super, super clear consistently, despite a couple of places where the rabbis like to point to, like Ezra chapter 10, verse 6, or is it 9 verse 6? I think 10, 6. And at any rate, and that's much later, right? At any rate, patrilineal descent, clear in the Torah. The rabbis made it matrilineal descent. So the Torah, they didn't just make their own authority. They really thumbed their nose right in God's face. They spat right in God's face. They said, we don't care about your law. We're making a law that's not just different. It's going to be in many ways 180 degrees in opposition to your law, right? And this is why I believe it's Kumisi. I think it's Kirkasani, one of the most famous Karaite sages of all times. He compares, it might have been Kumisi, but I think it was Kirkasani, who compares the rabbis to Yerovam. Yerovam was the king who broke off from Rehovam. Rehovam was the son of Solomon, and Rehovam could not hold on to the entire kingdom for reasons you can go ahead and read in the beginning of the first book of Kings. And so the kingdom split into two at that point: the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, consisting of Judea and Benjamin, basically. And right. And so then Yerovam, what does he do? He sets up two idols, one in Bethel, and the other in Shomron. I can't remember now. Bethel and Shomron. I think it was Bethel and Shomron. Shomron was the capital of the northern kingdom. I'd have to look it up. Now it's bothering me, so I have to go look it up. Let's look it up for 1 second. We're never going to finish this portion. First Kings. So it's got to be around First Kings. Let's go with 10. No, it's going to be way past that. So Solomon. No. A second. Let's go with First Kings 15. Getting close. 14. 13. Let's go back. Here we go. First Kings 12. So So here we go. So we'll just read this very quickly. Okay, golden calves in Bethel and Dan. So now Yerovam breaks off from the southern kingdom. Okay, so then Yerovam fortified Shechem in the hill country. Blah blah blah. Yerovam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. Right? So he's worried that as long as there's only one temple in Jerusalem, then they're going to go back. He's now successfully split off 10 of the 12 tribes. It's 11 of the 12 tribes, but I think Benjamin, for the most part, stuck with Judah. But so we'll say 10 of the 12 tribes. And now he's worried that because they're going to go up to worship in Jerusalem and bring sacrifice in Jerusalem, they're going to go back to the house of David. Okay, they'll kill me and return to King Rehoboam. So he comes up with an idea. After seeking advice, the king, meaning Yerovam, made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. The implications here of these words in Hebrew, this all harkens back to the original golden calves in Exodus chapter 17, I believe. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. That's exactly what Aaron said to the people of Israel when he set up the golden calf in Exodus 17. Exact same words, right? So this is clearly harkening back to Exodus, I believe it's 17, or harkening back to the story of the golden calves. So he makes 2 golden calves. One he set up in Bethel, and the other he set up in Dan. Okay, so here we go, Bethel and Dan. So Yerovam sets up 2 alternative places of worship, and both of them are in the northern kingdom. Bethel is north of Jerusalem, already part of the northern kingdom. Dan is on the coast. Okay, in fact, today the area of Tel Aviv they call Gush Dan. Okay, the Dan region. Okay, so that's on the coast. And yeah, so he sets up these 2 alternative places of worship, setting up 2 golden calves in his territory, in the territory of the northern kingdom. And this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one in Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. Okay, Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. So here's another horrible thing he did, right? He made priests who were not of the tribe of Levi, right? Who were not descendants of Aharon. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So what does he do here? This is absolutely fascinating. He makes his own Sukkot. He makes his own Hag Sukkot. He makes his own Sukkot holiday. Okay? Where do we see this? We see this, where we go? Right here, right? He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah. Well, what festival is it referring to? It's speaking about Sukkot, which is held on the 15th day of the 7th month. So he took the festival of Sukkot and he made it a month later, right? He's like spitting right in the face of God. He changed the place of worship from Jerusalem, which had been chosen directly by God at the end of the book of Shmuel Bet, right? We have the whole story where the plague that was brought against Israel, and it stopped at the very place where which on the threshing floor that would later become the Beit HaMikdash, right? So that's when God chooses Jerusalem, okay? And so he instituted, and so Yerovam sets up 2 alternative places of sacrifice and worship. He deliberately imitates the golden calves explicitly, right? Even saying the same words that Aaron said to the people of Israel in the desert in Exodus 17. And then he institutes an alternative festival, right? A mirror festival, shall we say, on the 15th day of the 8th month, imitating Sukkot, which is on the 15th day of the 7th month, right? So, at any rate, let's read on a little bit. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made, and at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings. So Yerovam, Volk, you gonna feed the cats now? Okay, go ahead. So Yerovam, what? Yerovam is not just, misinterpreting the Torah. He's deliberately spitting in the face of the law of God or the law of Moshe, depending on whether you want to go by which verse you want to go by that we saw in Nehemiah chapter 8, right? He's deliberately spitting in the face, making almost like deliberately a mirrored but different, deliberately mirrored places of worship, festivals, etc. And so this is why, again, I think it's Kirkasani, it may have been Kumisi, refers to the rabbis as being like Yerovam, because they didn't just change the Torah like randomly. They changed it in a very deliberate way that mirrored 180 degrees mirror of the true Torah. So the beginning of the year, according to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, is the first month in the spring, right? What we would call today Nisan. The rabbis, when did they make the beginning of the year? The 7th month. 6 months later, exactly halfway across the calendar. The Torah tells us that everything should go by patrilineal descent. That's your identity as an Israelite, and the tribe you belong to goes by who your father was. The rabbis made it the mother. And there are many, many, many more examples, but those are maybe two of the most prominent. Okay? So just a quick comment here, right? So I love the Samaritans. They're great people, and they keep a much more authentic form of the Torah. But they too have violated the law, a very, very important part of the law of Moshe. And they have built an altar, just as Yerovam built altars in Bethel and Dan. So they've built an altar in Shechem, right? And Shechem is actually mentioned here, as a matter of fact, right? Yerovam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there, right? From then he went up and built at Peniel. Peniel is a place that Yaakov comes to after he crosses, and it's basically where he fights the angel. At any rate, neither here nor there. The point being is that, I'm sorry to say, as much as I like the Samaritans very much, and I hope they come back and recognize Jerusalem as the place, the only place where God has chosen to place his name, the fact of the matter is that they have done in a certain sense the same thing that Yerovam did. They have set up an alternative altar in an alternative place that God did not choose, and so therefore they didn't set up a golden calf at least, but they did set up a false place of worship, and that has to be one day dealt with. Sorry to say, I love the Samaritans. I have friends who are Samaritans, but that is the fact of the matter. Okay, I wish the Samaritans would just make that one correction, and then all will be good, well and good. In their Samaritan Bible, in their Samaritan Torah, they actually have 11 commandments, and the 11th commandment in the Samaritan Torah is that the temple shall be built, or I don't know exactly. I'd have to look at the words again, but basically the place of worship shall be Har Gerizim, Mount Gerizim. Okay. So that's that. Ever read the blasphemy of Pirkei Avot? Yes, I have read the blasphemy of Pirkei Avot. Okay. Why would Yahweh tell the prophet to anoint a man who would later introduce golden calves? Yahweh has his reasons for doing things, right? A lot of the bad kings were chosen by Yahweh, and maybe that's God's way of paying back the people for acting right. Wouldn't it make sense? I mean, I never ever claim to understand or say what God's thinking is, but let's say the people let's say you had a class, you were a teacher and you had a class that was acting really bad, and you tried to get them to behave, but they wouldn't behave. Maybe you'd pay them back by giving them, saying, I'm quitting, and I'm going to, here's a new teacher who's going to lead you astray just as you deserve because you won't listen to me, right? What's the phrase God says? It's in Deuteronomy. No, it's in Leviticus chapter 26, if I'm not mistaken. Oh boy, I have to remember where it is exactly. But basically, God says no, it's not in Leviticus 26. It's in, I have to remember exactly where. Is that Isaiah? Is it Jeremiah? God says, I will laugh at your suffering because I brought you prophets. I tried to give you wisdom and instruction. You would not listen to me. And so therefore I will send you false prophets. And when they lead you astray, I will laugh at your suffering, right? So Yahweh may be using that as a way to pay back the people who are sinning, right? I don't know. You'll have to ask him. Just speculation. Okay, so let's go back to here. Any questions? Any comments so far? This is just a fascinating. I'm just loving this study. I love every Torah study, but this one is really, uh, really hitting strong for me. Okay, so let's unravel a little bit here. Let's get out of Kings. Let's go back to Deuteronomy. So Moshe is now going to give his first sermon. Okay. Yahweh Eloheinu diber elenu b'chorev lemor rav lachem shevet b'har hazeh. So Yahweh, our God, spoke to us at Chorev. Chorev is Mount Sinai. Lemor, and said, Rav lechem shevet b'har hazeh. You've sat at this mountain for too long. Okay, time to leave the mountain. So when was that? I think we have it listed here. So when did they leave Mount Sinai? In Numbers 10:12. And I'll just read this here. Oops. Does this mean the new moon of the third month? Blah, blah, blah. So we have here our little list. And I really have to go back and complete this. So on the third month, okay. I should really list the year, right? It's all first year. So, but this implies, okay, so they left Har Sinai on the 20th of the second month of the second year, and this is explicit in Numbers chapter 10, verse 12. We're not going to go back to it right now, okay? And then they arrived in the desert of Paran on the 23rd of the second month of the second year. So 3 days later, because it mentions a 3-day journey. Okay, so it's referring to that. That's when they leave. That's when they leave the desert of Sinai, the Sinai desert. Okay. Penu lachem uvo har ha'emori wa'el kol shchina v'arava b'har u'b'shvela v'negev ובחוף הים ארץ הכנעני והלבנון עד הנהר הגדול נהר פרת. Okay, so turn and travel and go or come to the hill, this usually translates Hara Emori, the hill country of the Amorites. That's referring to the land of Judea, basically the land they're going to take over. Okay. Let me just get a Robert Alter up on this one. So we're in Deuteronomy 1. Okay. High country of the Amorites, same thing. Hill country of the Amorites. Okay. Wa'il kol shchenav, and to all its neighbors. Ba'arava, Bahar, Ubishvela, Ubanegev, Ubachof Hayam, Eretz Kena'ani. So the hill country of the Amorites, it's referring basically to the Judean hills, and all of its surrounding neighbors. Within the Arava is the wilderness, the mountains, the plains, and Vanegev is the desert or the Negev desert, the Hofayam along the seashore, Eretz Kena'ani, the land of the Canaanites. Okay. So the Canaanites, very well, Eretz Canaan, the land of the land of the Canaanites. So the Canaanites lived along the shore, basically. Okay, the Amorites lived in the hill country, right? While Lebanon is, we know where Lebanon is, although it didn't mean the same Lebanon as today. I think specifically Lebanon started more south back then, or what they considered Lebanon. I'd have to check exactly, but at any rate, it means north of Israel, right? Lebanon comes from the underlying word Lavan, which means white because it's filled with snow-capped mountains, right? Lebanon is not a desert, not by a long shot. Lebanon is actually a very green, mountainous country for the most part. Ad Hanahar Hagadol, okay, until the great river. Whenever it says Hanahar Hagadol, it's only speaking about one thing, but here it clarifies it in case we're not 100% sure. Nahar Prat, the Euphrates River. So basically, take possession of the land. Okay. Okay, go to the land. So God's saying, you've had enough around this mountain, go to the land. Of course, that's not what happened, right? And we'll find that out soon enough. So again, Hanahar Gadol, that always means the Euphrates River. When it says Hayam Gadol, so Hanahar Gadol means the great river. That's always the Euphrates River. When it says Hayam Gadol, that means the Great Sea. That's always the Mediterranean Sea, what we call today the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so that's really the extent of right. So really the Israelite territory, its full extent, is meant to be from the Great River to the Great Sea. That's meant to be our land. Okay, now Prat. Okay, verse 8. Behold, I've given the land before you. I'm giving it to you, right? I'm setting it before you. I'm gonna, drive out its inhabitants. Okay, Bo Rishu et haaretz. Go in or come and take over, inherit the land. Asher nishba Yahweh, which Yahweh swore the Avram la'avotechem, to your forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, letitnehem ulizaram aharem, to give to them and to their descendants after them. Well, here's an interesting point: to give to them and to their descendants after them. Okay, you never really gave it to them, right? Okay, so I don't want to dwell on this, but what does that mean? Okay, well, all three of the patriarchs lived in the land for some period of time, right? The only one who lived for his entire life in the land was Yitzhak, but Avraham and Yaakov did not live their entire lives in the land. That's for sure, right? But so what does it mean? And the land was not given to them at that time, okay? But latet lahem lizaram acharem. So this is an interesting way that the Torah works, right? The promise is given to them, right? So it's really talking about the promise combined with the actual takeover to the land. This whole complex of promise ultimately leading to fulfillment of that promise. That's really what the Torah is talking about. It's a very different way of thinking from the way we would think in the West, right? We would say, oh, that doesn't make sense. He didn't give him the land. Oh, this is incorrect. The Torah is this is the P source or the whatever source, right? It's not the P source, the J source. It mentions Yahweh a lot, right? And the other whatever. You make up some kind of excuse, but really it makes perfect sense if you understand what I would say is ancient Israelite thinking or non-Western thinking, right? Okay, to give to them and to their descendants after them. It means that the promise plus its fulfillment, right? We could see the forefathers and us as a unit, an inseparable unit, and the land is being given to this entire unit, right? It's a very kind of non-Western way of thinking, even though it spans times when specific individuals like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants up until Joshua, right? And the Israelites at the time were not in possession of the land. Okay. So, okay. Omar elechem ba'et hahi lemor lo uchal livadi setetchem Yahweh Elohechem yirba etchem wahimtchem hayom kekochavei hashamayim larov Yahweh Elohei avotechem Yosef alechem kachem 1000 פעמים ויברך אתכם כאשר דיבר לכם. Just want to see 1 second. Okay. איכה אשא לבדי תרחכם ומסעכם וריבכם הבו לכם אנשים חכמים ונבונים וידועים לשבטכם ואשימם בראשיכם. Okay, what is this referring to? You can read the translation in English, okay? ותענו אותי ותאמרו טוב הדבר אשר דיברתי לעשות ואקח את ראשי שבטכם אנשים חכמים וידועים ואתן אותם ראשים עליכם שרי אלפים ושרי מאות ושרי 50 ושרי עשרות ושוטרים לשבטכם. Okay. So basically Moshe is saying Well, let's just read the English to make it go fast. So this is verses 9 through 14. So at the time I said to you, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. The Lord your God has increased your numbers so that today you are as numerous as the stars in the sky. Okay, so this is back when we know there were about 600,000. Okay, so are there 600,000 stars in the sky? I don't know. Actually, I read an article recently that says there are only 8,000 visible stars in the sky. I don't know if that's so. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times and bless you as he has promised. But how can I bear your problems and your burdens and your disputes all by myself? Choose some wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will set them over you. You answered me, what you propose to do is good. So I took the leading men of your tribes, wise and respected men, and appointed them to have authority over you as commanders of thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens and as tribal officials. And I charged your judges at the time, hear the disputes between your people and judge fairly. We'll get back. We didn't read the Hebrew on this one. We will in a second. Whether the case is between two Israelites or between an Israelite and a foreigner residing among you. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. Let's get back to the Hebrew. So is this what happened? Does anybody remember what happened? So the way the story is told here, it seems like Moshe made up the whole idea himself that he's going to, set judges over the people. But if you remember, it was actually Moshe's father-in-law, Jethro, who basically saw that Moshe was being crushed under the burden and came along and suggested to Moshe that he do this, right? And then Moshe agreed, and it was done. Okay, so that's going to be in. Let's see this. Oops. Oh, no. I gotta go back up here. That's in Exodus. Let's go with 16. Not quite. Is it 19? Something tells me it's 19 for some reason. No, that's already too close to the Ten Commandments. 18. Here we go. 18. All right. So in Exodus 18, 18:13, the next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around from him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought before me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and his instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied." Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the peoples at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. And then Jethro went away. So is that the same thing we see here? Let's see. At the time, I said to you, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. Really? Did Moses say that? Or did Jethro say it to Moses? The Lord your God has increased your numbers so that today you are as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times and bless you as he has promised. But how can I bear your problems and your burdens and your disputes all by myself? Choose some wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will set them over you. So did Moses come to the people and say that? Or was it Jethro, as we saw in in Exodus 18, who came to Moses, and then Moses did it? You answered me, meaning the people answered Moses, what you propose to do is good. So I took leading men of your tribes, wise and respected men, and appointed them to have authority over you as commanders of thousands or hundreds or fifties and of tens, and as tribal officials. And I charged your judges at the time, hear the disputes between your people and judge fairly, whether the case is between two Israelites or between an Israelite and a foreigner residing among you. Do not show partiality in judging. Here, both small and great alike, do not be afraid of anyone, for judgment belongs to God. Bring me any case too hard for you, and I will hear it. And at the time, I told you everything you were to do. Okay, well, so if I were a secular Bible critic or Bible scholar, quote unquote, then I would say, oh, the answer is very simple. This is the D source. Of course, I said it was the J source, but no. Everything in Deuteronomy is by definition the D source, the Deuteronomical source. And back in Moshe, well, let's see, we have a lot of Yahweh's name being thrown around a lot. Oops, where were we? Oh, I'm sorry, this is Exodus, right? So, so this is the J source, the Yahwist source, right? But of course, that's a lot of baloney, right? There's no Yahweh source and Deuteronomical source and priestly source and Elohist source and all of this kind of stuff. Okay. What there is just the same story being told from two different perspectives. Okay. Moshe is not outright contradicting what we saw in Exodus 18 here in Deuteronomy. He's not contradicting it. He's kind of telling it from a different point of view, right? Maybe, okay, he's downplaying the role of Jethro. He's kind of upplaying his own role, but he's certainly not directly contradicting. He's just kind of, saying it a little bit differently, because one could say that this is what happened after Jethro gave him the advice. Maybe he came to the people and said to the people, should I do this? And the people said, agreed. And then Moses appointed the people, right? And at the time here in Deuteronomy, in verse 9, at the time I said to you, you were too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. The Lord your God is blah, blah, blah. This entire speech here. So it doesn't contradict what happened in Exodus 18. It doesn't mention Jethro, but, this is, clearly Moses got the idea from Jethro, but then he went and spoke to the people and said, oh yeah, I do realize it. You're too heavy a burden for me. Let me go speak to the people. So this is very interesting. This is very enlightening what we see here when we compare Exodus to Deuteronomy. It's not two contradictory sources or two, independent sources as the secular Bible critics might claim. But really what it is it shows what Deuteronomy is. It's filling in the picture, okay? It's filling in things that we didn't know before. It's expanding. It's giving more insight. It's kind of like, what would be an example? Oh, I see a movie, okay? I watch a movie, and I watch the movie to the end, and then I go back and I watch the director's cut, okay? And the director's showing scenes that we didn't see before, and he's explaining things from his point of view, and he's adding things and expounding upon things and giving them deeper understanding. He's filling in the missing picture or filling in the incomplete picture. That's exactly what Moshe's doing. He's just retelling the same story, okay, giving more information than we knew before. We didn't know that Moshe went to the people, okay? We didn't know that Moshe said, Yahweh, your God has increased your numbers so that today you're as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times and bless you as he has promised. Okay, beautiful little blessing here, okay? And also one that is very common whenever numbers are related to the people of Israel, right? So, for instance, again, when David wants to count the people, and then I believe it's Nathan who comes to him and says, may your people be as as numerous as the stars in the sky. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Maybe said the sand on the seashore. I don't remember. I have to go look at the exact verses, right? But this is whenever you're counting the people, you're really not supposed to count the people. And the reason you're not supposed to count the people is it shows a lack of faith in God, because it doesn't matter how many people there are. If God is with the people, then it's enough to win all the battles, conquer the land, do anything that needs to be done. So this blessing, it always seems to be a similar blessing, always seems to be in the vicinity, in juxtaposition with any reference to the numbers of Israel. Not always, but many times. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times, bless you as he has promised, right? So, but how can I bear your promise? So this is filling in the missing picture. This is expounding and expanding what we found out from Exodus 18. It's not contradicting it, right? It's told from a different perspective, and it's told at a different time, 40 years later, and Moshe's filling in the missing picture, right? Okay, maybe he should have mentioned Jethro. I think he should have, but I don't know why he didn't. Okay, but that's his decision. Okay, but it's certainly not a contradiction. Okay, all right. At any rate, let's go on in Deuteronomy. And I'm going to end the study soon because it's getting late. Right. Okay. So we were here. I'll start in 13. Havu lachem anashim Hakhamim u'nivonim wa yidu'im leshivtachem wa asimim barashechem v'ta'anu oti wa tomaru tov hadavar asher dibarta la'asot ואקח את ראשי שבטכם, אנשים חכמים וידועים ואתן אותם ראשים עליכם, ושרי אלפים ושרי מאות ושרי 50 ושרי עשרות ושוטרים לשבטכם. Okay? וצווה את שבטכם וצווה את שבטכם בעת ההיא לאמור, highlight these 3 verses in לאמור שמוע בין אחיכם ושפטתם צדק בין איש ובין אחיו ובין גרו לא תכירו פנים במשפט כקטון כגדול תשמעון לא תגורו מפני איש כי המשפט לאלוהים הוא הדבר אשר יקשה מכם תקריבון אליי ושמעתיו. Verse 18, ואצווה אתכם בעת ההיא את כל הדברים אשר תעשון. Okay? So, okay, I just read that now back in the Hebrew. It's very interesting here. I don't think we have time to get into it, but it says here, שמוע בין אחיכם, שפטתם צדק בין איש ובין אחיו ובין גרו. So between each person and his brother. Okay, so brother is a bad translation. It really means kin. So when it speaks about ach in this context, we see it's speaking about the actual blood relations, right? We're talking about the patrilineal descendants of Jacob, right? In this case, and maybe their wives. The children are patrilineal descendants, right? So uben gero, and also between the ger, the sojourner, the stranger, right? So we have a distinction here. First of all, we get a juxtaposition or an apposition between ach and ger. So ach is the same as an ezrach, a native-born Israelite, basically a patrilineal descendant, a blood descendant of Yaakov, and a ger is someone who's living among the people who's not a blood descendant of Yaakov. Okay, but nonetheless, we're supposed to judge between each person and his brother, his kin, meaning other patrilineal descendants, and between each person and the ger. Okay, and I guess it would also apply between ger and ger. Ish would include both ach and ger. Okay. But it's very interesting here. We have the juxtaposition or the apposition of ach to ger. Okay, so whenever we see the word ach, we might imply that it does not include the gerim. It includes the kin, the patrilineal descendants of Yaakov, but it does not include the ger, those who are not patrilineal descendants of Yaakov, but who are living among the nation. Okay, So Moshe's retelling what happened. So that's Moshe's retelling of Exodus 18, when Jethro came and saw that Moshe was taking too much of a burden on himself, and that it was not good, and suggested making a hierarchy of judges with Moshe at the top of the hierarchy, which of course gives us insight into Deuteronomy 17:9, which we'll get to, where again that's a big polemic against the Karaites, because the rabbis say, oh, the judges are the rabbis, basically, is what they say. So they have the right to change the law of the Torah. We'll get to it when we get to it. Okay, so that's that. Let's read on. So now we're talking about the 12 spies. So now this is going to be Moshe's recounting of the story of the 12 spies. The 12 spies is Numbers. Oops. Numbers 10? No. We just saw it before. 8? No. 7? Oh, darn. Where the heck is the 12 spies? Okay, let's look it up. Numbers 13. So close. I'll remember number 13 is bad luck. That's how I'll remember it. So this is going to be Moshe's now retelling of the incident of the, did I say 12 spies? The 10 spies. Not the 12 spies. 12 tribes, 10 spies. Get it confused. Don't get it mixed up. All right. So, oh, shoot. Oh, shoot. There we go. Okay, so we can compare again, okay? So Deuteronomy, 12 spies. No, right. I'm sorry. It is 12 spies. One for each tribe. 10 spies gave a bad report. 2 spies gave a good report. 12 spies. Okay. So here we go, verse 19. So let's just get it again in context, right? So Moshe's sermon starts with they're at Mount Sinai, and God said, "You've been sitting at Mount Sinai too long. Time to get your butts over to the land of Israel." Okay. But before we go, I'm appointing a hierarchy of judges, and then we're going to get our butts over to the land of Israel. However, that's not the way it worked out. Okay, verse 19. וניסע מחורב ונלך את כל המדבר הגדול והנורא ההוא אשר ראיתם דרך הר האמורי כאשר ציווה יהוה אלוהינו אותנו ונבוא עד קדש ברנע. So they came to Kadesh Barnea. Is that in my list of journeys? No, I have to add that. Verse 20. وأمر إليكم باתם עד הר האמורי אשר יהוה אלוהינו נותן לנו. And you can just follow along with the English translation on your own. I'm not going to translate it word for word. ראה נתן יהוה אלוהיך לפניך את הארץ עלי הרש כאשר דיבר יהוה אלוהי אבותיך לך אל תירא ואל תחת. Basically, here we are. We're in Kadesh Barnea. Time to go up and take over the land. That's a paraphrase of these verses. Verse 22. Yikes. Verse 22. What תקרבון אלי כולכם ותאמרו נשלחה אנשים לפנינו ויחפרו לנו את הארץ וישיבו אותנו דבר את הדרך אשר נעלה בה ואת הערים אשר נבוא elehen. So basically, you sent representatives and you said, wait a second, let's just check this place out before we take it over. Okay? Yikes. Verse 23. Wa ipav be'elai hadovar wa ekah mikem shnim asar anashim ish ehad lashevet. Wa, verse 24. Wa yifnu ya'alu hahara wa yavo ad nahal eshkol wa yirgelu yiraglu oto. Verse 25. Yikes. Here we go. وَيِكْهُ بِيَدَامْ مِپْرِي هَآرَتْ وَيُرِيدُ إِلَيْنُ وَيَشِيبُ أُتَانُ دَبَار وَيَمْرُدْ طَوَا هَآرَتْ أَشَرْ يَحْوَهْ إِلَهِنُ نَتَنْ لَانُ. Paraphrase of these verses 22 through 25. Sent spies. Okay, so the spies went up into the land. Okay. Verse 26. وَلَوْ هَوِيتَمْ لَعَلَوْت وَتَمْرُوا et pi Yahweh Elohechem. And you didn't want to go up, and you rebelled against the mouth, against the word, against the instructions of Yahweh your God. Verse 27. Wa teragnu ba Elohechem. Wa tomru basinat Yahweh otanu. הוציאנו מארץ מצרים לתת אותנו ביד האמורי להשמידנו. This verb I'm not sure of. Ragan. Yeah, I don't really know that word. It's never used anywhere else in the Torah except here. It is used in Psalms. Yeragnu, Elohim. That's probably referring to Ruach Mina Rogagim. Okay. Grumble, murmur. EDB. Rogim. Ifal, Psalm. That's also used in Proverbs. Okay. Nirgan. Let's look at Psalms 106:25 for a second, probably talking about this very same incident. Yeah. So I don't think it's a Psalm of David. It seems like later writings. At any rate, so if we look at it very quickly, Wayomer. So this is basically, I think this is basically a recap also of all the journeys of Israel. But we'll start here. So Psalms chapter 106. We'll start in verse 23. Wayomer lashmidam lule Moshe b'hiro amad ba peretz yifanav lashiv hamato me hashchit. So he wanted to, or he said he intended to destroy them, destroy Israel. This is speaking about God intending to destroy Israel. We saw that a number of times. Until Moshe b'chiro, his chosen one, stood in the gap. Basically, he stood between God and Israel. Okay, lifanav, before him, before God, lashiv hamato mehashchit, to turn back his anger from destroying Israel. So this is a retelling, okay, of what happened in the desert. Wayimasu ba'eretz hamda lo heminu li devaro, and then they grew sick, or they rejected. Not rejected. Ma'as means like grew weary, to grow tired of. They grew tired of, or they rejected. I'll go with Be'eretz Hamda, the beautiful land. Lo heminu lidvaro. They did not believe in his word. So this is now speaking about the spies. Okay. ירענו באלוהיהם, לא שמעו בקול יהוה. And they whispered, conspired, complained against God. They did not listen to the word of Yahweh against their God. ויישא ידו להם להפיל אותם במדבר. And so he raised his hand up against them. He lifted his hand against them to strike them dead, literally to make them fall in the desert. ולהפיל זרעם בגויים ולזרותם בארצות. And to make their descendants fall before the nations and to disperse them among the land. So that's now already referring to much later. He didn't disperse them among the lands until much later. So that's kind of, I guess, referring either to the curse or maybe this was already written after the Babylonian exile. Not clear. So now this is referring to the Baal Peor. This is the incident with the Midianites, with Bil'am, that we read not too long ago. Anyway, let's get back to here. This is the important verse, okay? So this is speaking about the spies, the incident. So verses 24 and 25 and 26 are speaking about the incident of the spies and the response to it, okay? And here we have this word in verse 25, okay? They, and here the translation is, complained. Here we saw it as, oops, where was it? Anyway, it's the same word that we're seeing here with teragnu. So the psalmist, I hate saying the psalmist, it sounds too intellectual and dry and academic. Whoever wrote the psalm is taking that word, which appears only once in the entire Torah, in the entire Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in the entire 5 books of Moses, okay? And using the same word again, right? So we see this is that he's picking up on that word, which is used only here, okay? Which the BDB translates as complain. No, translates as, we'll go back to it in a second, okay? But the point is, it's using exactly that same word again, right? So whoever is writing this psalm clearly is referring directly to the Torah, clearly has access or has memorized the written Torah, the written Chumash, okay? It's just interesting that that's where we see the word, when the word is used, one of the few places it's used in the Nach, not the Tanakh, but in the Nach, it's basically picking up, or it's basically repeating the word as it's originally used within the context that it's originally used, which is the spies. Okay. So that's Psalms 125:25. I'm sorry, 106:25. So murmur, whisper, complain. Okay. See how Robert Alter translates that one, just out of curiosity. So this is not a very common word, right? It's not a hapax legomenon. It occurs more than once, but for the Torah, it's a hapax legomenon. It only refers once in the 5 books of Moses. It refers other places in the Tanakh. And then we have some occurring in other forms, such as in the Nifal form. At any rate, so I want to see what Robert Alt has to say about this one. Close this off. We're going back to Deuteronomy. So this is 127. And I really have to stop the study soon, unfortunately. And you grumbled. So he translates it as grumbled. Let's see if he has any comment about it. Okay, no, he doesn't. So, but he does say something interesting. The extreme vehemence of this phrase, in the Lord's hatred of us, which we'll get to in a second, which does not appear in Numbers, again reflects the writer's tendency to incriminate the people in this book of admonishments, that is Deuteronomy. So so basically what Robert Alter is saying is that Moshe, when he's giving his sermons, is being really harsh on the people because he knows he's not going to be there to lead them much longer. And so he's really got to drill it into them, right? Scare the bejesus, scare the God out of them, really, scare the living daylights out of them, and really, really beat them down, so that he feels this is the only chance that they're going to have to be able to successfully take over the land. And he already knows, right? It's already been predicted by God that they will not stick to the Torah, but Moshe is certainly doing his part. He's really going to give it to them. He's really going to be harsh with them to make sure they remember what he has to say, and that they stick to the law of God, which is his ultimate goal in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay. Any questions, any comments? We'll go a little while longer, and then I've got to end. Anybody want to say anything or comment on anything at this point? All right, let's go on a bit more. So, with teragnu, you complained against your God with tombru. Abisan Yahweh otanu hotzi anu me'eretz Mitzrayim latet otanu biyad ha'emori lashmidenu. So, and they said, and you said, so again, speaking about Moshe speaking to Israel, you said at the time in the incident of spies, because God hated us, in God's hatred of us, okay, he took us out of the land of Egypt and to give us into the hands of the Amorites, who will destroy us, okay? Well, again, this is that's not mentioned. This exact statement is not mentioned, but this is Moshe's perspective. Moshe's either quoting things that were actually said or paraphrasing to make a point, right? But this is Moshe's retelling. This is Moshe's kind of exposition on what happened. He's basically giving a review. He's touched on three things so far, right? One, time to leave Har Sinai. Two, Jethro's advice to set up the hierarchy of judges and leaders. And three, now speaking about the spies, and then Israel's rejection of the 10 spies' rejection of the land. Okay, let's go on. Verse 28. Ana, anahnu, olim, ahenu, hemasu et livavenu, lemor am gadol waram mimenu arim gidolot uvisurot. Now this is quoting basically word for word from Numbers 13. V'shamayim magam b'nei anakim ra'inu sham. Just one second. Okay. Yeah, so where can we go up? Okay. I'm just going to read on. You can follow along in the English, and then I'll paraphrase. Wa omar alechem lo ta'arsun v'lo tira'un mehem. I want to see this word. Again, one of these words, it does appear a fair amount. Okay. Okay. So clearly from this context here, techat means to fear, and ta'arotz, okay, means to fear. All right. So, mer alechem lo ta'aritzun, don't be afraid. Velo tiraun, and here ta'aritzun, ta'artzun and tiraun are placed in parallel with each other, which again gives context to the meaning of ta'aritzun. So it basically means fear. Mehem, verse 30. Yahweh Elohechem haholech lifnechem hu yilachem lachem kechol asher asa itchem b'Mitzrayim la'einechem. Verse 31. So basically, Moshe is saying, so the Israelites are scared to go up. Moshe is saying, don't be afraid. Look at all that God did for you in fighting against the Egyptians. He can do the same thing and will do the same thing here. Okay? So again, is that what Moshe said? No, it was really Caleb ben Yefuna and Yoshua ben Nun who said that. They were the ones who basically said, "Don't worry." Right? You can look back in Numbers 13 and see Yeshua and Caleb said, "Don't worry. We'll eat them alive. They are bread." It was literally the phrase, and God will be with us. And if only we have faith, if we just need to have faith in God, and He will conquer them and give us the land. Right? But now Moshe is making himself the center of the story, just as he did. He doesn't even mention Jethro when he speaks about the setting up the hierarchy of judges. Here he doesn't mention even Yoshua, Caleb ben Nun, I don't think, right? No, he doesn't, right? So he's making himself the star of the story. I don't know why he's doing that. I can't believe it's any kind of arrogance because Moshe was the most humble person ever. It says that explicitly in the Torah. But I don't know, who knows? It's just interesting, right? Who knows? Maybe, everyone has a little bit of an ego. Maybe Moshe is just, for whatever reason, is just making himself the center of the story, right? It wasn't Moshe who really said that. It was Caleb ben Yefuna and Yeshua ben Nun. But at any rate, okay, let's not hold it against him. Verse 31. Uba midbar asher ra'ita asher nas'acha Yahweh Elohecha כאשר יישא איש את בנו בכל הדרך אשר הלכתם עד בואכם עד המקום הזה. So basically, God also kept you in the desert. He took care of you the way a father takes care of his son. ובדבר הזה אינכם מאמינים ביהוה אלוהיכם. And still you don't believe in God? Verse 33, ההולך לפניכם בדרך לתור לכם מקום לחנותכם באש לילה לרעותכם בדרך אשר תלכו בה ובענן יומם. So you still don't believe in this God? You saw with your own eyes how he leads you by fire at night, the pillar of fire at night, and by the pillar of clouds or the clouds during the day. Okay? So this is Moshe's retelling of the story of the 12 spies, which happened already 40 years ago or 38 years ago. It was in the second year or the third year, 37 years ago. Okay, verse 34, and I really have to end after these couple of verses. وَيِشْمَع يَحْوَى el kol divrechem وَيِقْصَف وَيِشْبَع לאמור אם יראה איש באנשים האלה הדור הרע הזה את הארץ הטובה אשר נשבעתי לתת לאבותיכם. זולתי כלב, well here it mentions כלב בן יפונה, הוא יראנה ולא אתן את הארץ אשר דרך בה ולבניו Ya'an asher mileh acharei Yahweh. So basically, the response, this is now Moshe's explanation of God's response. You people are not going to see the land because you rejected it. The only people who are going to see it are Caleb ben Yefuna and Yeshua ben Nun, because they fulfilled my will. They went after me. Verse 37. Gambi hitanaf Yahweh biglalchem lemor gam ata lo tavo sham. Now, this is an interesting statement. Also, God hitanaf. This also is a word. Okay, be angry with. Also not so common a word. More or less familiar with it, but I need a refresher there. Gambi hitanaf Yahweh biglachem. God also became angry with me because of you. Lemor gam atal lo tavo sham. Also, you will not go there. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Is this correct? Is the context here correct? Moshe is implying that he was restricted from going into the land because of the incident of the spies. That God got mad at Moshe because of you guys who rejected the land, and therefore he wouldn't let Moshe into the land. Is that what happened? No. What happened was when Moshe struck the rock, right, which took place before that. I'm trying to remember now, right? We'd have to go back and check, right? So is this a contradiction? No. Maybe this is Moshe's adding information we didn't know before. Maybe the striking of the rock wasn't the only reason, right? Maybe God had other ulterior motives for not wanting Moshe to go into the land. Okay? If we had more time, we'd check that all out. We'd go back, we'd look at the striking of the rock, we'd look what was said, but we don't have time. My point is that Moshe is giving kind of his own take. He's adding information. He's filling in the missing picture. He's giving his own perspective on things, which is a very, very important perspective because he's the one who is the leader of Israel, right? So it would be like if you read, okay, you watch the news every day during the Trump administration, and then you read, I don't know if Donald Trump's going to write a memoir, but you read a memoir of, I don't know, who would be one of Trump's loyalists. I don't know. They all betrayed him, scumbags. I think Jared Kushner, who I can't stand, just came out with a memoir. And then you read Jared Kushner's memoir, and you're going to fill in a lot of the missing picture that you didn't see day to day in the news, right? It's kind of the same thing here. This is kind of Moshe's take on things. Moshe's memoir or Moshe's sermons. He's filling in a lot of the missing picture for us. It's not a contradiction. It's just his perspective and him filling in a lot of the information which may not have been given when we were watching the original, news clips, so to speak. We'll go a little bit more. We'll go to the end of this paragraph. Verse 38, Yeshua bin Nun. Yehoshua bin Nun ha-omed לפניך הוא יבוא שמה אותו חזק כי הוא ילהלנה את ישראל. Okay, well, this is interesting too because it says Yeshua bin Nun ha-omed lefanecha, Joshua ben Nun, who stands before you, meaning who's going to be the leader of Israel, but he was not chosen of the leader of Israel at the time of the spies. It only happened much later, right? So Moshe couldn't have, unless I'm missing the point here, Moshe couldn't have said to the people that Joshua, the one who's going to stand before you, is going to lead you into the land, he's going to go into the land, unless he's speaking about standing before you, meaning when he came back from spying the land. Anyway, this needs more investigation. Okay. If we had time, we'd do it. V'tapchem asher, last two verses, and I'm going to stop. V'tapchem asher amartem labaz yihye uvnechem asher lo yadu hayom tov wa ra hema yavo shama v'lahem etnena v'hem yirashuha v'atem v'nu lachem v'sa'u hamidbara derech yam suf. Okay, so your children who you said were going to die out in the desert, they're the ones who are going to see the land. This is basically pretty much a paraphrase of Numbers 13. And you, in the meantime, you go out. Now you're sending you out into the desert towards the Yam Suf, towards the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. Okay? I'll just read without any interpretation till the end of this chapter, and then we'll stop. Okay. وَتَعَنُوا وَتَمْرُوا إِلَيْ حَتَّانُوا لِيَحْوَةِ أَنَخْنُوا نَعْلَى ונלחמנו ככל אשר ציוונו יחווה אלוהינו ותחקרו איש את כלי מלחמתו ותהינו לעלות ההרה. תהינו, לתהות, it means like in modern Hebrew it means like to wonder. I'm trying to see. It appears once, so maybe it's not the same verb. It is easy. Tahinu. Okay, another time. La'alot hahara, verse 42. Wa yomer Yahweh elai emor lahem lo ta'alu velo tilhamu ki eneni bikirbahem velo tinafu lifnei oivechem. Right. So again, it's telling the story about how after they get the bad news, they decide, okay, we're going to go up and take the land, and then they get beaten down by, as we'll see, وأدبر عليكم ولو شمعتم وتمروا את פי יהוה وتزيدوا وتعلوا ههارا. So you decided to go. I told you not to go up and fight the Amorites, but you did anyway. Okay, after I rejected the land for you, I sent you out to the desert. You said, okay, no, 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 we'll go up and take it. And then I said to you, God said to them, no, don't do that. And they said, and they decided anyway to do it. And what happened? Say, Ha'emori hayoshev bahar hahu nikratchem ويردفوا אتכם כאשר תעשינה הדבורים ויעקטו אתכם בשעיר עד חורמה. So then you went up, and the inhabitants of the land came out of you like a swarm of bees, basically. As the bees do, right? When I was a kid, I must have been about maybe 14 years old or something like that. There was a bees hive in my front yard, and myself and my brother had the great idea that we were going to throw stones at it. That was not a good idea, it turned out. And all of a sudden, a swarm of bees came out towards me, and I ran for my life. I ran straight across the street to the neighbors across the street, and in the neighbor's front yard, the bees caught up to me, and they stung me pretty much all over the back of my neck. Thank God I had a shirt on, and they didn't sting me in my hair. And I had like I don't know how many, like 10, 12, 15, who knows, who remembers, bee stings all over the back of my neck and maybe some of my arms. I don't remember. I remember primarily the back of my neck. So when a swarm of bees comes after you, it's serious stuff, and that's the analogy that's being used here. That the people, the Amorites, or the people of the land of the Amorites, will come after you like a swarm of bees. Okay, yeah, and they struck you down from Seir, and here Seir is mentioned again. That we spoke about that before. That's the land of Esav. Ad Horma, to Horma. I'm not sure what Horma is. Place in Simeon. Okay. ותשובו ותבכו לפני יהוה ולא שמע יהוה מקולכם ולא האזין אליכם. So then you came back and cried to God, and God refused to listen to you. Okay. ותשבו בקדש ימים רבים בימים אשר ישבתם. And then you went to Kadesh. I believe it's the same as Kadesh Barnea, for many days. Ekiyamim asher yashavtem, according to the days of your sitting, or you could say it like that. Okay, that's it. That's the end of Deuteronomy chapter 1. I'm going to end it here. Any final comments? Any final questions before we end it? No? Then I will wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov. And hopefully we'll do it again next week. And that's it. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.